Princess Lyra stood at the window of her tower room, watching the 3 moons rise over the crystal city of Aster. The moon's light made the buildings shine like cut gems. From this high up, her home looked perfect, just like the people who lived in it wanted to be. But Lyra was not perfect. Not by Asteri standards. She looked down at her arms, while other Asteri had skin that looked like polished diamond. Clear, hard, and with perfect geometric patterns. Lyra's skin shimmered with soft scales in colors that shifted like oil on water. Blues, purples, greens, and colors that had no name swirled across her skin when she moved. "Princess," a voice called from behind her door. "Your evening meal." "Come in, Tero," Lyra said. The door opened, and an older Asteri entered. Tero was one of the few servants allowed to see her. His crystalline skin had a slight yellow tint, a small flaw that made him less than perfect, but not enough to be hidden away like Lyra. "The royal family is hosting a dinner tonight," Tero said as he set down her tray. "The High Council is there to discuss the alien visitors." Lyra's heart beat faster. The humans. They've arrived. Their ship landed this morning. They'll stay for 3 cycles to discuss trade agreements. Lyra had read everything in the palace library about humans. Unlike the Asteri, humans were all different from each other. They came in many colors, shapes, and sizes. None of them had the same face. It sounded wonderful to Lyra. "I wish I could meet them," she said. Tero gave her a sad look. "You know that's not possible, Princess. Your father has made it clear that I am to remain hidden." "Yes, I know." Lyra turned back to the window. The shame of the royal family must never be seen. She had heard those words all her life. When she was born, the royal doctors had expected her scales to harden into crystal like all Asteri children. But they never did. Instead, they stayed soft and colorful. The royal family had hidden her away since she was small. Outside her window, flying vehicles carried important Asteri to the palace. Their bodies glittered in the moonlight. All identical. All perfect. Lyra touched the wall of her room. Unlike most Asteri buildings made of sharp angles and perfect lines, she had shaped this room herself over the years. The walls curved in gentle waves. She had carved flowing patterns into the stone. Patterns that had no mathematical formula. Patterns that other Asteri would find disturbing and wrong. "Princess," Tero said, "you haven't touched your food." "I'm not hungry," Lyra said, though that wasn't true. She was hungry for something else. Freedom, acceptance, someone who would look at her without disgust or pity. That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. She went to her bookshelf and pulled out an old data tablet she had fixed herself. The palace technicians would never repair anything for the flawed princess, so Lyra had learned to do many things on her own. She opened her secret files, images of other worlds sent back by Asteri research ships. Worlds where life came in endless forms. Mountains that weren't perfect triangles. Plants that grew in chaotic, beautiful patterns. Animals with asymmetrical markings. And humans, so wonderfully different from each other. Somewhere out there, Lyra whispered to herself, there must be a place for someone like me. She didn't know that her life was about to change. She didn't know that in just a few days, someone would look at her and see not a flaw, but a wonder. Someone would see her beauty. That someone was coming with the human delegation, and he was about to turn her world upside down. Captain Jack Miller hated formal events. The stiff collar of his dress uniform rubbed against his neck as he followed a group of Asteri officials through the royal palace. The building was beautiful, but cold, all sharp edges and perfect angles that hurt his eyes. The Asteri value symmetry above all else, Dr. Reed, the team's xenobiologist, whispered to him. Every measurement in this palace follows strict mathematical rules. Jack nodded, trying to look interested. He was here as Earth's main representative, but he was an explorer, not a politician. He had seen a dozen alien worlds before this one, but never a species as rigid as the Asteri. The royal banquet will begin in 1 hour, announced their guide, an Asteri official whose skin looked like polished diamond. You may rest in your assigned quarters until then. The human delegation was led to a wing of identical rooms. Jack waited until the Asteri left, then slipped out. He wanted to see the palace without a guide watching his every move. Jack walked down empty hallways, fascinated by the cold beauty around him. Every Asteri he passed looked exactly like the others. Same height, same clear crystal skin, same emotionless faces. They reminded him of statues more than living beings. After a while, Jack realized he was lost. The hallways all looked the same. He turned a corner and found himself in a part of the palace that felt different. The walls here had curves and flowing lines. The perfect angles were softened. At the end of the hallway stood a single door, carved with swirling patterns, unlike anything else he'd seen in the palace. Curious, Jack pushed the door open. The room inside took his breath away. Unlike the stark whiteness of the rest of the palace, this room was alive with color. The walls were covered with flowing designs. Strange plants grew in pots by a large window. And standing by that window, looking as surprised as he was, stood the most beautiful alien Jack had ever seen. Her skin wasn't clear crystal like the other Asteri. Instead, it shimmered with colors that moved like the northern lights on Earth. Blues, greens, purples, and colors Jack had no names for. Her eyes were wide with shock. "I'm sorry," Jack said quickly, remembering his manners. "I got lost. I'll leave." "Wait," she said in perfect English. Her voice was musical, rising and falling in a way the other Asteri voices didn't. "You're a human." Jack nodded. "Captain Jack Miller, Earth Diplomatic Court." He gave a small bow. "And you are?" The alien seemed to hesitate. "I am Lyra, Princess Lyra." Jack frowned. The Asteri officials had introduced the royal family earlier. There had been a king, queen, and prince, but no princess. "I didn't see you at the welcome ceremony," he said. Lyra's colors darkened, shifting to deeper blues. "I am not allowed at official functions." She touched her shimmering skin. "I am different." Jack didn't understand. To his eyes, she was stunning. The way her colors shifted and moved made the other Asteri look boring and lifeless in comparison. "Different is good where I come from," Jack said, smiling. "On Earth, we like different." Lyra's colors brightened, showing patches of gold and rose. "Truly? Your people don't all look the same." Jack laughed. "Not even clothes. We come in all shapes and sizes." A sound came from the hallway. Footsteps approaching. "You must go," Lyra said quickly. "No one can know you were here. They would punish me for speaking to an outsider." "I'll come back," Jack promised, backing toward the door. "If that's okay." For a moment, Lyra's colors swirled in a pattern Jack couldn't read. Then she nodded once. "I would like that," she said softly. Jack slipped out the door just as a servant rounded the corner. As he followed the servant back to the guest wing, Jack couldn't stop thinking about Princess Lyra and her rainbow skin. He didn't understand why the Asteri would hide something so beautiful, but he intended to find out. Over the next few days, Jack found reasons to slip away from the official meetings. Each time, he made his way to Lyra's tower room. The Asteri officials never noticed his absence. To them, all humans looked alike anyway. "They'd scheduled us for 6 more trade meetings today," Jack complained as he sat on the floor of Lyra's room. "Your people love meetings." Lyra's skin rippled with patches of orange. Jack had learned this meant she was amused. "The Asteri believe perfect order creates perfect results," she explained. "Is that why they—" Jack hesitated, not wanting to be rude. "Why they hide me away?" Lyra finished for him. Her colors darkened. "My appearance breaks their sense of order. It frightens them." Jack shook his head. "That makes no sense. You're beautiful." Lyra's colors shifted to a soft pink. No Asteri had ever called her beautiful before. "Tell me more about Earth," she said, changing the subject. "About human diversity." Jack smiled and pulled out his tablet. He showed her pictures of Earth's people, tall, short, dark-skinned, light-skinned, with different eye shapes and hair colors. No two humans look exactly alike, he explained. Even identical twins have small differences. Lyra studied the images with wonder. And this is normal. Accepted. More than accepted. Celebrated, Jack said. We have festivals of diversity. Art that shows our differences. Our strength comes from being different, not the same. As they talked, Jack learned that Lyra knew more about Asteri history and science than any official he'd met. She had spent her life reading and learning, with nothing else to do in her isolation. Your skin, Jack said on his third visit. May I ask how it works? Our scientists would be fascinated. Lyra hesitated, then held out her arm. You can touch it, if you want. Jack gently placed his fingers on her forearm. Her scales were soft and warm, shifting colors under his touch. It's like a mood ring, he said, then had to explain what a mood ring was. Lyra laughed. A sound like musical chimes. Yes, my colors show my feelings. All Asteri once had this ability, thousands of years ago. But they bred it out, preferring the clear crystal skin. They said emotions made us weak. Jack frowned. That's not weakness. That's evolution. Communication. During one visit, Jack brought a small microscope from the human medical kit. With Lyra's permission, he took a tiny sample of her scales. Your biology is amazing, he said as he studied it. These cells are more adaptable than regular Asteri cells. They can change function, heal faster. The royal doctor said I was a mutation. Lyra said quietly, a step backward in evolution. Jack looked up from the microscope. I think they're wrong. This isn't a step backward. It's a leap forward. On his sixth visit, Jack arrived looking worried. What's wrong? Lyra asked, her colors turning anxious blue. I've been reassigned, Jack said. They're sending me back to the main diplomatic team. The Asteri officials say I'm not needed at the technical meetings anymore. Lyra's colors faded to a dull gray. So you won't be able to visit. I'll find a way, Jack promised. But there's something else. Have you heard about the illness spreading in the lower city? Lyra nodded. Taro mentioned it. Some kind of fast-moving infection. The royal family is worried, Jack said. They've asked for human medical help. What neither of them knew was that this illness would soon change everything. For Lyra, for Jack, and for the entire Asteri civilization. As Jack left that day, he made a silent promise to himself. Somehow, he would show the Asteri the beauty they were blind to. The beauty of difference. The beauty of Princess Lyra. 3 days passed without Jack visiting Lyra. She paced her tower room, her skin shifting between worried blue and sad gray. Outside her window, she could see increased activity in the city. Medical ships flying between buildings, officials rushing about. Taro arrived with her evening meal, looking more worried than usual. What's happening in the city? Lyra asked. The illness spreads quickly, Princess, Taro said. Over 500 Asteri are sick now. The crystal skin turns cloudy, then cracks. The pain is terrible. And the human doctors, are they helping? Taro shook his head. They try, but they do not understand our biology well enough. That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching the emergency lights flash across the city. Somewhere out there was Jack. Was he safe? Were humans affected by this illness too? Just before dawn, her door burst open. Jack stood there, breathing hard. Jack. Lyra's colors flashed bright with surprise and joy. No time to explain, he said. I need your help. Can you come with me? It's important. Lyra hesitated. She had not left her tower in years. The guards are busy with the emergency. Please, Lyra. People are dying. Lyra nodded and followed Jack into the hallway. Her heart beat fast as they moved through the palace. Jack led her to a service elevator that took them down to a level Lyra had never seen before. The human medical lab, Jack explained, as they entered a room filled with strange equipment. Dr. Reed is waiting. A human woman looked up from a microscope. Her eyes widened at the sight of Lyra's colorful skin. "So you're the princess Jack told me about," she said. "He thinks you might be the key to saving your people." "Me?" Lyra's colors swirled in confusion. "How?" Dr. Reed pointed to a screen showing crystal-like cells breaking apart. "This is what the illness does to HFY cells," she explained. "Their rigid structure can't adapt to the pathogen." "But Jack had a theory about your cells." Jack stepped forward. "I kept the sample of your scales we looked at before. When I exposed it to the pathogen, something amazing happened." He showed her another screen. "Your cells changed shape to fight off the infection. They didn't break." "You're immune," Dr. Reed said simply. "And we think we know why." They explained that Lyra's flexible, color-changing cells could adapt to the pathogen in ways the crystal cells could not. Her imperfection was actually a powerful defense. "We need your help to create a treatment," Jack said. "Will you?" "Of course," Lyra said without hesitation. "What do you need?" "More samples," Dr. Reed said. "And we need to test our treatment. But there's a problem." Jack looked uncomfortable. "We have to tell your parents. We need permission to announce what we found." Lyra's colors darkened with fear. Her father had kept her hidden for 20 years. Would he rather let his people die than admit his flawed daughter might save them? 2 hours later, Lyra stood before her parents in the royal chamber. The king and queen's perfect crystal faces showed no emotion, but their rigid posture betrayed their shock at seeing her outside her tower. "What is the meaning of this?" the king demanded. Jack stepped forward and explained everything. The illness, Lyra's immunity, the possible cure. He spoke with confidence, never once suggesting Lyra was flawed or lesser. When he finished, the royal chamber was silent. Finally, the queen spoke. "If what you say is true, then we have no choice." She turned to Lyra, seeing her daughter truly for the first time in years. "You will help create this cure, and then return to your tower," the king added coldly. But Jack wasn't finished. "With respect, Your Majesty, I don't think that will be possible. To distribute the cure, people need to know where it came from. They need to know about Princess Lyra." The king's face hardened. "Impossible. The people cannot know." "That your daughter might save them all," Jack interrupted. "I think they deserve to know exactly that." Lyra's skin flashed with a color Jack had never seen before, a brilliant gold that lit the room like sunrise. News spread quickly through the Crystal City. Princess Lyra, the hidden daughter of the royal family, was working with the humans to create a cure for the deadly illness. The official announcement showed her image for the first time, her colorful, shifting scales shocking to a population who had only known perfect crystal clarity. For 5 days, Lyra worked alongside Jack and Dr. Reed in the medical lab. Her body produced the substances they needed to make the treatment. The first tests showed promising results. "It's working," Dr. Reed said, looking at the latest sample. "Your cells are teaching the regular HFY cells how to fight back." Lyra's colors swirled with hope. For the first time in her life, she felt useful, important, maybe even valued. That afternoon, a small crowd gathered outside the palace. Lyra watched from the lab window as an HFY official tried to send them away. "What do they want?" she asked. Jack joined her at the window. "Some want to thank you. Others," he hesitated. "Others what?" Lyra pressed. "Not everyone is happy about the cure," Jack admitted. "Some HFY leaders think using your different biology will corrupt their people." That evening, Tarot brought worrying news. "The High Priest of Purity is speaking against you in the temples, Princess. He says your condition is not a gift but a punishment from the stars. He says accepting help from your tainted cells will doom our species." Lyra's colors faded to a dull gray. "They would rather die than accept my help." "Some would," Tarot said sadly. "The old ways are strong." The next morning, Jack arrived looking concerned. The first batch of medicine is ready, but 3 district leaders are refusing to distribute it. Why? Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer. They're calling it impurity medicine. They're telling people it will make them like you. Jack's face showed anger. It's stupid and dangerous. That afternoon, Lyra was summoned to the Royal Council chamber. For the first time, she would face the High Council, the 12 leaders who help rule the Asteri people. As she entered with Jack beside her, she felt their cold stares. Princess Lyra, the High Priest said, his voice full of disgust. You have violated our most sacred laws by leaving your tower and showing your condition to our people and to aliens. She's trying to save your lives, Jack interrupted. And corrupt our purity, another council member said. Already there are reports of young Asteri attempting to color their skin to be different like the princess. This sickness of mind is worse than the physical illness. Lyra stepped forward, her colors shifting to a calm blue. If being different means living instead of dying, is that really so terrible? The High Priest stood up. We demand that all work on this cure stop immediately. The princess must return to her tower. The humans must leave our world. The king looked uncertain. More Asteri were dying each day, but the council's power was great. Jack spoke up. You know what I think? I think you're not afraid the cure won't work. You're afraid it will. You're afraid it will prove that difference isn't weakness, it's strength. A commotion at the door interrupted them. A young Asteri rushed in, breathing hard. Your Majesty, the Eastern District, the medicine reached them this morning. The sick are recovering. Murmurs spread through the council chamber. The Eastern District leader acted against our orders, the High Priest demanded. She said she would not watch her people die for pride. The messenger replied. The king stood up. The evidence speaks for itself. The cure works. But the cost, Your Majesty, the High Priest pleaded. The social order. The cost of change, the king said slowly, looking at Lyra. Maybe less than the cost of staying the same. Lyra felt a small spark of hope as her colors brightened. But she knew this battle was far from over. 2 weeks after the first treatments, the illness began to fade across the city. Thousands of Asteri owed their lives to the medicine made from Lyra's cells. Yet the divide in society grew deeper. They saved my child's life, a mother told the news reporters. I don't care if the medicine comes from the princess or a space rock. It works. But others remained afraid. The High Priest and his followers continued to spread fear about impurity and corruption. They claimed those who took the medicine might begin to change, to lose their perfect crystal form. Lyra was allowed to leave her tower now, but whenever she walked through the palace, some Asteri turned away or hurried in the opposite direction. They need time, Jack told her as they walked in the palace garden. Change is hard for any species, but especially for yours. Time won't help if they refuse to see, Lyra said, her colors showing sadness. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. That's it. They need to see differently. The next day, Jack asked for permission to host a special event. He called it a cultural exchange between humans and Asteri. The king, grateful for the humans' help with the illness, agreed. Jack and his team worked for 3 days to set up the main palace hall. They covered the walls with images from Earth, art, nature, and people in all their diversity. But the centerpiece was something special Jack had asked his ship to send down from orbit. When the day came, hundreds of Asteri gathered in the hall, curious about human culture. Lyra stood near the entrance, nervous but excited. Her colors shifted between purple anxiety and yellow hope. Ready? Jack asked, appearing beside her. What exactly are you showing them? Lyra asked. Jack just smiled. Beauty. The event began with music, Earth songs performed by the human team. Then Jack stepped onto the stage. On Earth, we have a saying, he began. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It means that what one person finds beautiful, another might not. Beauty isn't universal. It isn't perfect. It's different for everyone. He waved his hand, and the lights dimmed. A large screen lit up, showing images of Earth's most beautiful natural places, all wonderfully irregular. Mountains of different shapes, forests with trees of various sizes, beaches with random patterns made by waves. Nature doesn't create perfect geometric shapes, Jack explained. It creates wonderful chaos, and from that chaos comes strength. Next came images of Earth's people, all shapes, sizes, and colors. We don't try to look the same, Jack said. We celebrate our differences. Finally, Jack revealed his surprise. On the largest wall, he projected a magnified image of Lyra's scales, showing the complex, ever-changing patterns of color. This is not disorder, Jack said. This is evolution. This is adaptation. This is life finding new ways to thrive. A young Asteri stepped forward, staring at the image. It's beautiful, she said, her crystal voice filled with wonder. Others came closer, seeing the patterns in Lyra's cells for the first time, not as flaws, but as art. An older Asteri approached Lyra. My daughter has small patches of color under her crystal skin, he said quietly. We've hidden it her whole life. But maybe we were wrong. Throughout the evening, more Asteri came to Lyra, some to thank her for the cure, others to whisper secrets of small imperfections they had hidden, of children born with touches of color who had been kept out of sight. You've started something, Jack said as the event ended. Something important. Lyra's skin glowed with the brightest colors Jack had ever seen. We've started it together, she said. A human who saw beauty where others saw flaws. It wasn't a complete victory. The high priest and his followers had not attended. But it was a beginning, a revolution in how the Asteri saw beauty, difference, and themselves. 3 months passed since the cultural exchange event. The illness was gone, but its effects remained. In medicine, in science, and most of all, in Asteri society. Lyra stood on her balcony, no longer in the hidden tower, but in new rooms in the main palace. Below, the city was changing. Small touches of color appeared on buildings once made only of clear crystal. Young Asteri had begun to decorate their homes with flowing, asymmetrical patterns. Princess, Tero called from the doorway. The king requests your presence in the throne room. Lyra followed Tero through hallways that now display both traditional geometric art and new works inspired by human designs. Some palace staff still averted their eyes when she passed, but others nodded respectfully. In the throne room, Lyra found her father, mother, and brother waiting. Also present was Jack, dressed in his formal Earth uniform. Daughter, the king said, his voice more gentle than Lyra had ever heard it. The human delegation completes its mission today. They return to Earth. Lyra's colors dimmed to a sad blue. She had known this day would come, but that didn't make it easier. Before they leave, the king continued, we must acknowledge what they have done for our world. He turned to Jack. Captain Miller, the Asteri people owe you a debt we cannot repay. Jack bowed. I only helped your people see what was already here, Your Majesty. The Queen stepped forward. The Royal Council has made a decision. Princess Lyra will join the official line of succession. When the time comes, she will rule as Queen of the Asteri. Lyra's colors swirled in shock. But the law says only those of perfect form may rule. The law has been changed, her brother said, smiling slightly. The first of many changes, I hope. The king handed Lyra a crystal medallion, the royal symbol that she had never been allowed to wear. Your difference saved us, he said. Perhaps other differences will save us in the future. After the ceremony, Jack and Lyra walked in the palace garden one last time. New plants grew there now, asymmetrical flowers brought from Earth that burst with color. Your ship leaves tonight, Lyra asked, her colors showing her sadness. Jack nodded. Earth needs to hear what happened here, how a princess changed her world. I didn't change it, Lyra said. You did, by seeing me differently. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to see beauty where others see flaws, Jack said. But what happens next is up to the Astari. Up to you. Lyra touched the medallion at her neck. I'm afraid. What if I fail? What if they never fully accept me? Change takes time, Jack said. But it's already happening. Look. He pointed to a group of young Astari in the distance. Some had small decorations on their crystal skin, colored patterns that caught the light. That was unthinkable 3 months ago, Jack said. As the suns began to set, they reached the landing pad where the human ship waited. Will you come back? Lyra asked, her voice small. Jack smiled. Wild space horses couldn't keep me away. I've requested to be Earth's permanent ambassador to the Astari. Lyra's colors brightened to joyful gold. They agreed. They did. I'll be back in 2 months with the new diplomatic team. Jack took her hand. And I hear the Astari might want to send an ambassador to Earth someday. Someone who understands both worlds. I would like that, Lyra said softly. As Jack's ship rose into the sky that night, Lyra watched from the palace steps. For the first time, other Astari stood with her, those who had been saved by her medicine, those who had begun to see beauty in difference. Above, stars filled the night sky, each one unique, each one beautiful in its own way, just like the people watching them from below. The princess who had been shunned turned toward her future, a future where difference wasn't feared but valued, where beauty came in many forms, and where one human's vision had changed everything.